So, alright team. Let's take a look at this thing. Go ahead and disable the in-game music. We'll turn on some sound effects though. Yeah, get a little bit of that WoW sound. Boom, 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 boom. Alright. You got the wave. Hello. Leveling up good old Fuzzy Moo today. We're at 76 out of 80. And we're going to do some dungeon farming while we watch this video here. Alright, we're going to learn how World of Warcraft is improving its UI, and essentially what is Blizzard's philosophy on add-ons. What's up with this new combat assist? I've already heard some people refer to it as like, you know, cell phone game, you know, button plays your class for you. I gotta be honest, I don't buy that because like just from the couple clips I've seen on like Instagram and stuff, and the fact they've described it as like that Hikili or whatever that add-on is called, replacement, it's not really gonna just play your character for you. It's gonna help make some like lukewarm suggestions at best. And by that I mean it's gonna, if you don't know what you're doing, it's gonna do a great job of helping you to figure out better what to do. But if you know what you're doing, you're gonna play better than that thing could ever tell you. So there's no replacement for skill, and that's my bet. That's my guess. That's where I'm putting my money. My chips are on that one right now. But I'm super curious to see what they say in this video, and so let's go ahead and check it out and just see what's going on.
To a special edition of WoWcast, where we're going to talk about a patch 11.1.7 feature, and then a broader discussion about add-ons in World of Warcraft in general. I'm Dratnos, World of Warcraft content creator.
I'm Max, I'm the raid leader of Team Liquid, the WoW Guild, and a content creator as well.
Okay.
And I'm Hozzikostas, game director on WoW.
Getting some food while watch this too.
Very excited to be here. So what are we doing in 11.1.7?
A whole bunch of fun stuff, but one of the features that we're extra excited about is a new UI option that we're adding called Rotation Assist, which is really designed to help players who are maybe picking up a new spec or want some guidance on what abilities they should be using when, without having to turn to third-party add-ons for it. So we've seen that, there's an add-on called Hikili that is very popular with a lot of players. We're basically building in a very similar version of that into the base UI that you can opt into. That will, no matter what DPS spec you're playing, highlight the recommended next ability given your current energy, what's going on around you, and so forth. One extra thing that we're also going to do, which maybe goes a bit beyond what the add-ons can do, is also have a one-button version of that, where there'll be like a keybind that if you just want almost an auto rotation, you can opt into that, and it will just automatically cast the next recommended ability in the sequence. There'll be a small GCD penalty associated with that, but we want to make sure that this is for accessibility purposes, that it's there for people who maybe just honestly aren't interested in the gameplay of like mastering their spec. They want to explore Azeroth and experience the story, and the mechanics kind of get in the way of that sometimes. This should be for them. Ideally, this is not a tool where someone is like being told by their raid leader to stop trying to DPS manually and just turn on the one button mode to meet some DPS check. That we want to give you the tools to kind of go through that organic progression naturally.
Great.
But so the rotation assist doesn't come with a penalty or anything like that. That's just we're going to show you what your next button is.
Exactly.
Right.
It's very similar to the Hikili add-on. It's kind of reflecting, just the latest kind of established theory crafting, and it's something that we would continue to update, with spec changes and class changes over time. Ideally, it all's born out of the idea that we've seen a valuable tool that players feel like they should be looking outside the game to download, and we'd rather just reduce the barriers to that and make it available to everyone.
Okay. I got some thoughts. First of all, on there's two things here. So there's like the Hikili cooldown, like a rotation assist, where like just like shows you like visually what's the best button you could push next. That's cool. I don't use those add-ons. I don't actually know anyone who uses that add-on because it's very like beginner oriented, and the people that I personally know and play with, they aren't beginners. So I think that's cool. Like it helps new players understand what they need to hit next in a live fashion. I think that's cool, and I don't think that's got any negative effect on the game. That already has existed for a very long time. It's training wheels. People take it off eventually. If they don't, then they like learn it. It doesn't play their character for them. But there's a second part of this, and that's that there's this single button rotation keybind. First of all, I still will almost guarantee you it's not as good as someone who's like actually making decisions in real time. I guarantee you it's not 100% good. It might be like good 80% of the time, but the moment you need to stun something for some reason is the moment that that button no longer works. The moment you need to interrupt a spellcast is the moment that button doesn't work. The moment anything happens that's not predictable by an AI, that button no longer works. But there's something else that I think is even more important, and that is that there's going to be a GCD penalty. So basically, this won't be an option for Mythic Raiders, Heroic Raiders, PvPers. It won't be an option because it's going to be too bad. If they start backing down on that, and that's kind of what I'm a little worried about here, is because they're saying this is for accessibility. They're saying that this is for people who want to opt out of class mastery, you know, like the skill of like playing a class, and they just want to enjoy the game. If with that being the angle they're taking, I'm immediately left wondering, well, then what, you're just going to penalize people for like needing more accessibility? This sounds like a slippery slope where I can see Blizzard being like, oh, we're actually going to remove the GCD penalty. And then you will see people using this stuff in PvP. It'll essentially be bots. Like, this is what bots do. Like, bots do the Hikili thing. You know, like in a way where it plays it for them. Like, not bots are literally using Hikili, as I just said. Hikili is a visual helper. Bots aren't visual. They don't need help. They just autoplay through a script of like, you press 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 1, then 3, then 2, then 4. You know, like, or bots play predictably. That's what this one button rotation is going to do. It's basically whatever script it is that the bots use, that's what this is going to be. So like, if the goal is to cut down on botting and like bot-like behavior within PvP, if they remove the GCD from this thing, like the GCD penalty, and make it to where there is no penalty for using it, so many battlegrounds are going to be absolutely full of jokers that are like, using this, and they're going to suck. So hopefully, I've known people like my mom, for example. She plays WoW. She does not care about class mastery. She does not care about learning how to play her character the best. She's played for over a decade, and I don't think if I asked her what her number 2 button is, like what button's on her keyboard on the button number 2, I don't think she could tell me what it is or what it does. She just knows that if she smashes her keyboard, her keybinds just right, she gets through the quest, and that's about as much as she'll ever probably know about her rotation. For her, this one button thing is amazing. Like, this is basically what she's been asked for forever. She's gonna love this. For people like me that just want like quality players to play Battlegrounds with and stuff like that, like, it's a little scary. So I can definitely see the community's reaction. I can see why so many people are calling it, some of the things are calling it. But anyways, those are my thoughts at the moment. Let's continue with the video.
Okay, yeah, because there's two parts of it, right? Like the advanced is, I want to really go into this, is the one button thing, but that's not necessarily everyone that's going to use this. Like, I think this game, especially new players getting into it, it can be, there's a lot going on within a particular class, and you can be a little lost trying to figure out exactly what I should be pressing. So even just using it as like a guide to start learning your class and move off of it eventually, but just having a base understanding of what actually should I be doing at a base level of this.
That's really exactly the motivation on our end. I mean, especially with warbands and War Within, we see lots and lots more alts, and leveling is pretty quick. You maybe got a bunch of Warbound until equipped gear that you're passing over to a new character, and just jumping into their full rotation, you've never played the spec seriously before, can be a pretty serious undertaking. And for some people, this may be enough for them, and that's fine too. But we recognize that there's so much, WoW has such a high skill ceiling that just recommending what the next ability isn't going to really remove that or fully solve that. There's still the muscle memory that you need to form, and then all of the nuances of, like, we might have a recommendation for a rotation that makes sense if you're fighting a target dummy, you're fighting patchwork, but when you need to plan around the fact that you're going to have to move in 4 seconds, that's a whole different layer of skill that still rests with players.
Yeah, I know when I'm trying to, play a new spec for the first time or haven't played it in years, it often feels like I've got like a 30-minute checklist of, okay, I got to set up my keybinds, got to make sure, oh, this ability's changed since 2 expansions ago, I got to rebind that. And then I got to go and read some guides and figure out how all my new rotation works, and oh, here's how the new set bonus works. So I could see it being really nice to just have this is a way to jump into some content to do with your friends and have it work out nice and easily. One thing that jumps out to me is that a lot of the content I'd want to do would be like delves or keys. And in either of those cases, there's a lot of AoE.
Yeah.
Is this going to have are we going to detect whether we're fighting 3 targets, 5 targets, and is it going to cast my Arcane Explosion instead of my Arcane Blast, or is it just always going to be a single target?
It's not just single target. There is, some sense of, how many enemies are within your range, in front of you, etc. And so that will affect the recommendations. Again, the goal is not optimal.
They just
the goal is
backpedaled.
not like this is going to, okay, everyone's always going to get perfect parses and so forth going forward. But as a baseline, this should be, it should be useful the same way that many, many people find Hikili useful today. And really, like a lot of this, building on the foundations of the cooldown manager that just came out in 11.1.5, kind of reflects us hearing people in the community telling us that they feel like they need to seek out these third-party resources just to play the game at like a baseline effective level in competitive content. And us asking, like, is that where we want the game to be in the long term, and what can we do to build in native solutions to many of these problems?
Like the base construct of it, there is this will help you learn what you're supposed to do if you are new. And then there is hey, I don't want to be the best player at this game. That's totally fine. I play it for a different reason. I want to collect things. I want to understand the story. I want to quest. I want to level, right? And I don't want to feel like I can go into any content and I just don't really know what I'm doing. I feel anxious about that. Like you have the ability to just be like, okay, well at least Blizzard's got me. I can have something at a base level where I can press one button and just kind of hang out and play the game. I have one question about the actual rotational thing. So is that going to change with talent? So let's say, is it going to work off the base talent build, or let's say you select a talent that now moves a AoE button into your single target rotation? Is it going to be smart enough or planned to be smart enough to incorporate a bunch of different potential talent builds?
The goal is that it's aware of your talents, and the logic is conditional based on what you do or don't have talented. As with, this is going to be something that continues to evolve. We may not have every single possible permutation accounted for in the version that we roll out with, but it should still be very useful in that form to everyone, and we'll just get refined from there. Similar to the cooldown manager that we know is that is a first take at this. We have plans to add much more customization, much more functionality to that over time as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting feature individually. The thing that's most exciting to me is in the broader context of the cooldown manager, of all these other edit mode changes that have come out. There was a time 5 years ago in WoW where if you were just getting into the game, there was an intimidating list of these are the add-ons that you need, and if you're not using these, you're kind of worse, right? Like you're noticeably worse. If you can't track your group member's major cooldown, right? You're worse at Mythic Plus than somebody who is, right? And it seems like the goal that has been accomplished with a lot of these things that have been coming into the base UI is you can use those add-ons if you want, but we now have a native way to the game that you don't have to get an add-on.
That is pretty much exactly our long-term philosophical goal.
That's the thing.
Add-ons are amazing. The things that the community has done over the last 20 years to allow people to experience different aesthetics, different functionality, have information available at their fingertips, that is a huge part of WoW's success, and we don't question or want to undermine that for a moment. At the same time, as you said, ideally it is about what do you want? How do you prefer to have things presented to you, and not what do you have to do? What is a group mate or raid leader or whatever telling you must download? Or if you ask people, hey, how can I get better? I'm really struggling at this. The first answer shouldn't be, well, download this add-on, this add-on, and this add-on, otherwise you're doing it wrong. Because that's starting to get into that mandatory place, whether we like it or not. So yeah, I think, longer term, these initiatives kind of fit into part of how we're thinking about the role of add-ons in WoW. As we can probably all agree, today there is a sense that if you want to really be the best you can, if you want to play competitive content, there are certain add-ons that are required, that are simply going to improve your success over not having them, period. We would like to get away from that being the case. I think I'd love to see a WoW one day where you can still customize the aesthetic look of your UI, you can have information and quest helpers and all the other things that you might want to have to make your experience a bit more seamless. but that at the end of the day, when you're in competitive content, when you're queuing up for a rated PvP match, when you're going into a high key, when you're trying to get a first kill on a raid boss, there isn't the sense that you are, just holding yourself back if you're not using specific tools. We know that there's a lot of work to do to get to a place where that could be the reality. The first steps really are going to be continuing to build up the just right out of the box functionality that World of Warcraft offers to shrink that gap. But at the same time, I think we're aware that at the very end of this process, we probably are going to have to rein in some of the functionality that add-ons currently have to do like real-time in-combat problem solving specifically, where it's like automating coordination, communication in ways that are always going to be better than anything the UI can natively provide you, as long as they remain possible.
Yeah, so that moves us into like raid bosses, where I don't want to name any names, but there are people who have optimized a little bit of their own fun out of the game sometimes. I don't know where any of them might be sitting. They could be anywhere. They could be in this room with us.
They could be in this room with us.
the like number one. Let's just YOLO this. Let's just do the fight. Let's make it work. And then sometimes it gets to let's try to make something that could be 95% successful, 100 or 99, right? And there's a lot of frustration with the tech involved with that. I would definitely be. I think a lot of the raiding community would be pretty for that. I think a well-designed mechanic that the game giving you enough information to solve this on your own realistically. A lot of the times the community will just use one because it's like what everyone else uses. It gets you in the same place. But if that doesn't exist and the game is giving you that information, it's objectively better, right?
And even if you are doing it very well, manually, it's always going to be better to do it perfectly in a competitive situation. I mean, having watched, your raid leading, for example, over many, many years over the race to world first, like years ago, you would call much more stuff verbally.
Very
like
true.
going back to, Legion, BFA era, whereas nowadays it seems like if there is something you're calling repeatedly on attempts, the first thing you're doing is asking if, hey, can we automate this and get me out of the business of talking, which seems like it might be less enjoyable for you as a raid leader.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if we're talking about that, I could talk all day about that. Yeah. No. I mean, I felt like you certainly had more of an impact when you had the ability to, influence the fight more. But the reality is just getting some way to automate it for your players is just better. It is funny. Like when I do that now, I think, what else can I be doing with my time? I could be like looking at other ways to optimize, and it's purely for the sake of getting better. So yeah, for my own enjoyment, yeah, that's sweet. Let's do that. I'm trying to wonder also about those kind of mechanics. So like what bosses have existed in my head, I think in the past couple of years, there's not many, but have been
Max's opinion is a very interesting one.
When we're progressing this boss, we feel like maybe we're progressing a weak aura of something like Brood Twister or Echo of Neltharion or Jailer, maybe was one of the first ones, right? And those mechanics, I feel like could not have been done or probably would have been nerfed without weak auras or having that effectiveness of that reduced. What do you do as a fight designer now? Do you I know you're obviously like really passionate about raiding. You've raided for a really long time. What do you have to avoid those kind of assignment mechanics? Are there things in game you can use to like naturally sort out those things? Like, do you give more time for the mechanics? Like do you have to stray away from assignments in general because the community has just, whether you like it or not, has like trained themselves to have something solve that for them? Do you have to like go back into like a more simple version of that? Do you find other ways to make fights difficult?
I wasn't fast enough.
The way we design encounters has been influenced in significant ways by the way players use add-ons.
Oh no, I locked myself out.
Speculates
that
like this was built clearly to require an add-on. I can't say that's never the case. No encounter designer is ever sitting around saying, all right, we're going to make this mechanic, and then players will write this weak aura to solve it this way. All right, mission accomplished, let's ship the boss. But when we're thinking about the overall pacing of a fight, the tuning, we might get feedback on a fight that it feels like there isn't enough going on, when in actuality, there are 4 or 5 mechanics going on, but add-ons are largely compartmentalizing and making it so that most players don't have to think about them most of the time. And then players give us feedback that, hey, this fight felt a little bit slow, like I was just punching the boss for 3 minutes. And so then maybe we add another mechanic in the next iteration of that, or a similar encounter. We get to a higher overall complexity space where, there's just, you look at the dungeon journal and you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and maybe half of it doesn't even matter because add-ons are going to handle it for you. I think that's not a great place for things to land. It also definitely ties our hands in some ways. Like, I think we do fewer coordination mechanics than we used to. Like, there used to be, like, if you look at old school WoW days, there were encounters where, like, the primary challenge for your raid was by design coordinating some rotation. And the
That's true.
execution beyond
That's
that
true.
wasn't super complicated,
That's true.
but making sure that this thing stayed soaked or that you were rotating people through with their debuff or whatever, that became a big part of the fight's challenge. Now we know ultimately that that can never be the thing that we lean on for challenge because it's going to be solved, and it's not going to be solved through what we think of as the more just interesting MMOE like communication, cooperation, figuring out systems for having these things work in a way that feels collaborative. It's going to be downloading the weak aura pack, setting it up appropriately, maybe having 3 or 4 frustrating wipes because there was a typo in the configuration, which is that's not what I think anyone really wants rating to be. And so we move away from making those mechanics as much and lean more on things that add-ons can't solve for you, like moving out of a swirly under your feet with only a little bit of time to respond. I don't think it's a coincidence that more and more of our fights have those sorts of just twitch reaction, avoidance mechanics, whereas that used to be one type of fight that we did. The design space is definitely constrained by the knowledge that if we lean on it too heavily, it's just going to get trivialized.
Some of my favorite WoW raid boss memories are bosses like.
We got a lot of conversations in the community about exactly that.
You have to spread out, and then you get these marks, and you have to go to the right places. And there used to be definitely a library of mechanics like that, where you would get them, and then you'd have to think, and you'd have to have a system. And you'd have to have 20 players sort of coordinate and become one team that does a mechanic like that. And the fact now that add-ons take on much of that job of coordinating us, I think that almost all the Mythic Raiders I know would be delighted to move back to a world where we did that in our brains, right? But in Dragonflight, we saw a little bit of an attempt to make that happen, right, with the private aura system. And what ended up happening was we still had the weak aura, but now we also have a macro that we need to press, and then the weak aura will assign us the same thing. So I'm a little bit worried. How's the arms race between the weak aura devs trying to come up with a new way around the restriction that you're putting in? Is this just a further escalation in that?
Hopefully not. I think our goal here is kind of disarmament and definitely not further escalation. I think we understand that if we're not going to try more little targeted things like that are going to encourage workarounds and it just ends up with this back and forth. Because if there is a way to solve a complex mechanic, but you have to jump through a couple of more hoops to do so, you'll do that, and then just be more annoyed by the process. Our goal is to try to get out of that space entirely. And so I think down the line eventually, that may mean, I think, some broader restrictions on specifically what information add-ons have access to about combat events in real time. At the same time, we know that that's not a thing that we could just do right now without providing a lot more on our end, both in terms of just UI type functionality, but also looking at how we're designing some encounters, how some of our classes work. I think there are tons of add-ons that are healthy and valuable and really important to how players play the game that do rely on that flow of information. Everything from something as simple as damage meters to honestly boss time, ability timelines, the DBM style, when is this next ability going to fire that people have basically been raiding with forever. That's not the computational weak auras, that's just, hey, this ability is going to happen in 15 seconds. We want to build in our own version of that. I think down the line, we'd love to see a place where there is a boss timeline as just part of the encounter UI. And that's not something you need an add-on for. And that way we can hopefully eventually get to a point where we're really just cutting out the weak aura that solves the mechanic for you.
So I just want to chime in here, since we hit a spot with this dungeon. I like everything we're hearing here. I know there's going to be a lot of haters. There's going to be so many haters. I think this is great. As long as they don't go and they remove this GCD penalty, and this ends up getting 100% parses and shit, like the auto button. As long as that's not the world we're heading towards, this is great. And it sounds like that's very firmly not what Blizzard wants us to become. I have absolutely put my foot in my mouth after defending Blizzard before, and so, never say never, but, they're saying the right things. They seem to keep taking it pretty serious, and there's definitely a need for things like that Hikili add-on. There's a reason it's so popular. And also, the people that use it, they generally aren't the people that, if you're mad about this, then this thing, you're probably not playing with the people that use this kind of stuff anyways, to be honest with you. You're probably playing with some pretty experienced players that aren't relying on add-ons to tell them how to play. And as far as what they're saying about like their philosophy of add-ons going forward and like the limits and the constraints of like designing for them and things like that, they're right. They're absolutely right. Add-ons have trivialized a lot of what used to be like the most fun mechanics in raids, and raids have changed so much to accommodate the way that things are and have been because of add-ons. And I don't know a single person who doesn't dislike the swirlies. Like the instant 0-second reaction time swirlies and Mythic Plus one-shot your ass, okay? Nobody likes that. I don't know anybody that likes that. But that's, like he said, is about the only mechanic they can actually put into the game that doesn't get completely trivialized. So, yeah. I big agree with that. Pretty much everything he's saying here. Big agree. Sounds like a positive change.
But not the informational stuff that you feel like, it really feels like the game should have been telling you all along, where add-ons are, admittedly, kind of filling in some gaps there.
Okay, so coming in 11.1.7, we're going to have the rotation helper, those two options. What of the rest of this initiative? Is any of the rest of this in 11.1.7, or are we just starting the conversation now?
I think there's a lot of stuff that we're working on. I think, we've seen the cooldown manager and then the rotation assist coming. I think down the line, it's some of the stuff that I touched on. I don't have specific patch dates right now, but we are looking at damage meters. We're looking at nameplate improvements. We are looking at, a raid encounter information presentation that shows you timeline of boss abilities coming up. Things in that general space.
Good stuff.
I think we're looking at all the places.
I would love it if I didn't need to download things like DVM and little wigs, big wigs, whatnot.
To be competitive, and asking ourselves like, how do we change our game to make that not the case? And some of that's going to be add-on functionality, or UI functionality. Other aspects are going to be looking at how we're building some encounters or how some class mechanics work. Like I think it's super fair to point at some specs, like let's say Outlaw Rogue, who I know are easy one to pick on in some of these ways, and ask like, how is anyone really supposed to execute this perfectly with the base UI? Almost any time we're tracking like stacks of a buff, and you need to make a decision where it's like, if you're between 4 and 7 stacks, you should do this, otherwise don't. Those are not reasonable tests for us to be posing to our players without providing them the information to do it correctly. And so we need to either provide the information,
You're asking them to go look for help,
or both.
There are a lot of players who love the version of Outlaw Rogue that has existed over the past few years. So I think there's always some fear when this discussion starts up of, is the answer going to be to simplify everything? And I think it's really exciting to hear instead that the answer is, okay, we'll maybe simplify some of these huge outliers, but we're going to bring in the functionality that makes it so that instead of needing to download a WeakAura to solve this, right? Instead of needing to have a complicated assistant tell you, now you're supposed to press this button, now you're supposed to press this button, instead we're going to provide that information in a more clear way than looking at the top right of your screen to see your buffs and trying to catch the rotation buff between all the other 20 that are changing in combat.
That's definitely the goal. I think we want World of Warcraft to be as approachable as possible, but we also love that the skill ceiling in the game is as incredibly high as it is. That allows for tons of differentiation and self-expression
the best part of the game
and accomplishment. But I think a lot of at its core, a lot of skill in WoW I think boils down to multitasking ability, and like even just you might be able to do amazing damage just testing it against a target dummy. Very different world when you're also in an encounter and need to do 3 mechanics at the same time. And we see tunnel visioning DPS are a meme for a reason, right? They're just focused on their rotation and whoops, they just messed up the encounter mechanic, or vice versa. Someone who is good at mechanics but their DPS goes off a cliff. Really, like the function of a lot of these add-ons is to offload a portion of that computational complexity. And we recognize like if we are removing some of that functionality, we're providing more information, we can probably remove a couple of mechanics, but still keep the same level of challenge. The goal is not to make it easier. The goal is to make it less complex. And I think that's, I think it's a key distinction there. Because I think it often can sound like,
very
oh, this is
nuanced
about,
distinction
about dumbing down the game or simplifying things. It's not that. It's about trying to create a more approachable baseline experience that still has every bit as much room for differentiation.
When you were talking about add-ons that things have been in the game, been inspired by it, you mentioned a damage meter.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in just what your view is, philosophy-wise, about damage meters in gameplay.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Facts. I'm curious about that
ultimately,
too.
we have to be guided by what our community prefers and what we see them doing today. The single most popular add-on used across the entire game is a damage meter by like a fair margin.
Okay.
The majority of players, the large majority of players, have a damage meter add-on installed. And so that indicates that people want to see that information at least about themselves.
Yeah.
We definitely want more nuanced measures of success and understanding like how successful were you or how much did you contribute on this run, highlighting things like interrupts, highlighting things like avoidable damage to give a fuller picture of performance.
This has
But
been
at the
very
end of the day,
interesting.
I think for someone who's trying a new spec, trying a new talent build, getting a new trinket, and they want to see like how did this affect my performance compared to the last run, that's an important piece of information to have. And so I think we know that in any world where we were going to limit some of the ability of add-ons to like again do that real-time combat event tracking, we would need to provide a damage meter solution of our own. And I think one of the exciting things is I think if we're doing that on our end, we can also have it be server authoritative, so you're not worried about like who's in a different combat phase, who's out of range or whatever.
Yeah.
It could just be like, this is official and going to be accurate all the time.
We were obviously mostly thinking about Mythic Raid when our brains go to how this is going to affect things, but the overwhelming majority of players are
Yeah.
in heroic raids, normal raids, raid finder raids, doing Mythic Plus dungeons, right? When we're talking about making these changes to what weak auras can do, is there an appetite for changing how heroic and normal raids function as well? Like, do we see these problems in there as well for what add-ons can do and how they solve things?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it all trickles down, right? I mean, I think maybe even more, a larger percentage of players doing Mythic Raid might use specific weak aura packs than, let's say, normal. But those add-ons are used by the majority of players right now, and certainly other, boss mods are as well. And I think a lot of it just comes down to, what are the coordination challenges that we're presenting? If there's something that everyone is relying on a tool right now to assist with, we would have to change it to still keep it the same level of challenging, but without that same automation assistance. And that can take many forms. It can be there's one or two fewer things to soak. You have an extra couple of seconds to like actually spread out on the fly. It's a pretty common mechanic of like, all right, 3 people get a debuff and they just have to like run out in different directions from each other. People have been just kind of playing the game and doing those for years and years. But of course, if you can like, if the time you're given to react is so tight that you can't afford to do that, then people do gravitate towards, all right, we're going to put diamond, circle, and triangle on the ground. Everyone's going to get an auto-assigned marker, and you just know, like, I'm going to run to my marker to guarantee that it's executed correctly. I think it's a bit more interesting if we give you a couple of seconds so that you can look around and make sure you're not running in the same direction, and then do the exact same thing. I mean, at the end of the day, raiding in particular, but group PvE, group PvP too. Like in an MMO, a huge portion of I think the fun of it is just coordination, communication.
What does he
feeling
think
like
about
everyone's
PvP?
working together to overcome some challenge in front of them. And I think getting back into a space where there's room for more of that organic collaboration, as opposed to it just being like regimented and solved by an external tool, I think it will open up a lot of design avenues for the game going forward.
Throughout the last couple years, especially in Mythic Plus, that had been
Whoa.
ramping in complexity, you've seen, and actually even if you can go back, like you can see the amount of things that people have in their UI to help them know that something's
cool.
happening. So like back in Power Auras, it was, there was just some giant,
Power Auras.
some giant face on your screen would pop up, and that meant that something procced. And then it's gotten more, refined. And now, even in it's been ramping the past couple of years. You see like, you listen to someone's POV who's doing High Mythic Plus right now. You're going to hear AOE, dodge, frontal, circle.
Yep.
Like it's just every bit of audio
Everything.
aid they've used to. It's in the idea of being optimal. It's not required. And especially this patch, I think Mythic Plus complexity has actually gone down as an intentional design point. It seems, at least. I think you might have made a post about that. So that stuff is less required, but people have like kind of already baked down the UI. Is that something that you're looking to either have an ability to have that in the game, or is that something you don't want to have happen, where it's more like you're organically doing mechanics because you see them, or are you okay with all of the audio and visual aids that exist currently within add-ons?
I think the answer is mixed there. I think like audio prompts are something that are super valuable to people. That's something we want to continue to add support for on our end as well. Like we know feedback we've gotten around the 11.1.5 cooldown manager would be that many people would appreciate being able to have audio prompts tied to certain things or procs firing, and that's something they would miss about weak auras. We want to make sure that we're offering that kind of thing as well. Beyond that, I think a lot of what we've seen is frankly, us not doing a sufficiently good job of telegraphing
Facts.
the importance of certain mechanics and their impact, and players needing to come up with solutions for them externally. Ideally, there's a concept that we call affordance, which is basically just how well is something telegraphed, how intuitive is it with visual presentation, and ideally, the affordance of a mechanic should match its impact. And sometimes, yeah, if you have a random mob in a dungeon pack that has a frontal that will just delete you if you're not getting out of the way of it, and it's just one thing going on among a half dozen other things, why? And why? Like, how could we call that out better with visuals, with a longer cast time, with how we're creating the pack in the first place? And that's just one example of one of the areas in which we know we can do better. Something else we've talked about on the UI front is we would want the ability to, on our end, flag mob casts in Mythic Plus as like lethal, as like this should be a high priority interrupt, because we know players are going to basically look to solve that anyway. If there are 3 casters in a pack, and 2 of them it's actually kind of okay to let them free cast, but one of them, if they ever get a cast off, you're probably going to wipe. They shouldn't all just look indistinguishable on your screen.
Yeah. Facts.
And us
Big
expect you to figure
facts.
that out on your own.
They did that in season 1, right? Wasn't there like a couple casts or like super giga you die death volley or something?
Yeah.
And they had this big
It's
animation.
the Arcara casters where they hunker down, there's green glowy stuff around them, and they're casting a volley, and you're like, all right, I gotta kick
You
that.
could be playing WoW for 2 days, and,
Yeah.
you're like, that
That's not
cannot
happening,
That,
yeah.
that can't happen, yes.
But I'm looking forward to an M+ then, where if we're talking about maybe taking away my ability to air horn myself on a certain cast, something like that, if instead I have to be now looking at a mob and there is a sort of a visual language that I can come to expect, like if the mob is hunkering down and it's got particle effects around it, that means I gotta kick it. I think that would be more fun for everybody as well, rather than having the air horns be the solution.
Definitely.
That is entirely our hope, right? I think, and just to be super clear, I think we see the taking away part, the restricting functionality, as the end of this long road. I think we know, we want to make it very clear, we're not sitting here being like, all right, we want you to play the game the way we intended, and we're going to take away your tools. We just want to bridge that gap. And we have a lot of work to do on our end to keep building up more improvements, more functionality. And it's not just the UI. The VFX changes that you mentioned are a part of that overall effort of us asking, what are the places where players feel like they need add-ons to succeed? Why is that the case? And when it's like, it's not clear when you're standing in something, and so I need GTFO or some other sound effect to let me know that I'm standing in something lethal, it should be obvious. Let's fix that on our end. And we know we want to keep chipping away at those things, and hopefully eventually get to a point where really the only difference between what we are offering and what powerful add-ons can do is that small subset of like computational problem-solving stuff, at which point we can move forward.
So throughout the evolution of private auras, we've seen, initially when they came out, they were like kind of, a lot of friction was involved, and then I think they were done really, really well in a couple of cases, starting in Emir Drasil, where they were a mechanic like P1 Fire Act. You had the circles you had to quickly spread out for. They were pretty fast, but they were too fast to use a macro for it, and it basically forced the players into something they would have used a weak aura for, to just do the mechanic normally. And like, are there lessons you've learned there of like, this is actually how we can design mechanics or kind of assignment things going forward? And then also, is this, if done successfully, would this also remove private auras as what would have been,
I'm actually completely unaware of the private aura thing.
To the weak aura problem.
Yeah, we've definitely learned a lot from how private auras have rolled out. Certainly we understand that if we're ever using it on something that like is on a long enough time frame that macros are going to let you solve it, and it's punishing enough to not solve it, all we're doing is creating an extra annoying hoop to jump through. And
I see what's going on now.
Fixed off the private aura designation from some of those back.
Private auras seem to be whenever they make the auras private, meaning that the no add-on can like tell it's happening, meaning that it's entirely on you to like know that the ability is like gonna happen, that's on you, that like the mechanics going down. So basically it's a way of them trying to keep add-ons out. And apparently they've had some instances where they did that and people ended up having to create other solutions because it was a pain in the ass. And so they've learned from that okay, be careful what they hide. Don't make another problem.
Kind of Emir Drasil, and we've let that shape how and where we use or don't use it going forward. And so yeah, I think examples like the Furak mechanic that you mentioned are ones where like when we know that everyone is in a level playing field, everyone just has to play the game, play the mechanic. we can tune it accordingly so that it's hard but doable. We'd like to be able to do more of that for sure.
Yeah, I see the Fyrakk first intermission, which was a private aura and then had to get hotfixed off of the private aura, as sort of a cautionary tale for if there's a mechanic that is only doable with the weak aura assignments, and then we take away that without giving an adequate replacement, then it's worse than doing nothing at all. What would a mechanic like that look like in a world where we don't have a computational solution to it, right? Would it be slower and fewer sets of, like, lower damage numbers on these things?
I think probably a bit of all of that. There's multiple knobs there. There's, on Mythic we might default to like everyone in today's world. Everyone in the raid has to participate in this, and there's enough things to be soaked that if anyone isn't doing it, it's not going to work out. Versus maybe shifting to a world where there's a little bit more slush, things are a little bit slower, there's a little bit more time to react, to get into place organically based on which buff you were assigned, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, our goal here is to preserve challenge, and we know that we'd have to design encounters differently in some cases to deliver roughly the same level of challenge in terms of how many pull counts it takes, just what progression looks like, while living in a different mechanical world. And I know that when we talk about restricting any kind of add-on functionality, many players very rightly, kind of reflexively say or ask, well, how am I supposed to do this boss in this tier without my weak aura? That would be impossible. And the reality is, if you couldn't use that weak aura, that mechanic would be designed or tuned differently. We would have ended up nerfing it right away or designing it differently over the course of even just PTR testing. And so that's like any future design in this space will have to be built from the ground up with that in mind. And I think it's making it a little bit more forgiving in a way that makes the challenge human rather than superhuman, as it often is when we're looking at like cutting edge mythic tuned things. Because you guys are really good at the game, as it turns out, and we want to make a boss that is going to pose a challenge and is going to take you dozens of attempts, let alone 100 plus to beat. We do have to take into account the fact that not just you, but every Mythic raid guild that's going to follow in your footsteps are going to be using these tools. And at the end of the day, I think players do want challenging bosses. That if we just tuned the boss around none of those things, players used all those tools, and they went in and like a late Mythic boss was dying in a single night for like a cutting edge guild, rank 500 or whatever, that probably doesn't match what they're looking to get out of Mythic raiding. In my estimation. And so like our goal is to keep the same overall level of challenge while paring down the complexity a little bit.
Even if you look at the history of bosses this would have affected, you actually, even looking at Mythic Plus, something where the complexity has gone down from pack to pack in this patch, but the reality is you can still find challenge in it because it's infinitely scaling, and you will get to a point where it's doing too much damage to you, or the amount of damage you need to do is too high. There's been Mythic bosses that have been simple mechanically, but have been unbelievably difficult, and that's been true all the way down the guild ranks. It's not something that's just nerfed by gear, like Sludge Fist, where you've created really intricate problems to solve where weak auras basically didn't matter. Halandris, you actually put a bomb timer very clearly in the game around the bomb. You did not need a weak aura for one of the hardest bosses ever, right? It's more just basically the solution for these weak auras has been just a very specific kind of assignment mechanic that it's just like, oh, it's just so much easier to do this, right? You could build in a lot of that computational stuff in game to where even if weak auras existed, you would find people just being like, I don't know, the game just kind of does it. We have players that don't use audio sounds in weak aura packs because on bosses like Skarn, on most other bosses, there's like either an in-game sound for when the bombs are actually activating or a voice line. We have 2 players in our guild that use very minimal weak auras, and they literally listen to voice lines for when mechanics are going to happen, and it's extremely accurate, right? So I think a lot of these things are already
the voice lines tell you a lot, guys. Seriously, if you never tried it, the voice lines they tell you how to play.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think your example, going back to Nathri of Sludge Fist, I think is a great one, right? Like a lot of that was
Sludge Fist is the bane of my existence.
Just practice and just learning like how to react to these situations when chained to different partners and dodging the stuff. And people were in enough situations over enough time, they kind of develop that muscle memory, that sense of planning, and eventually your guild as a whole overcomes the challenge. Compared to, let's say, the Stone Legion generals that came after it, a couple of issues there, but like one of the central challenge, like one of the central mechanics that was being solved by weak auras was like, all right, there's a whole bunch of soaks that need to be covered over the course of the fight, and it's not realistic to have that, like 7 to 8 soaks up simultaneously, where you need to also account for like, well, this person just got targeted by different mechanics, so they need a backup to go in and do it for them.
Yeah, so it sounds initially like it's, we're restricting what add-ons can do, but really we're opening up the universe of mechanics that can exist in a WoW boss without, because there are so many that you could think of right now where all of them would be, this is going to get solved by this, right? This is going to get solved by this, but if that's not the answer, then now the designers have all these tools back, and we can get these mechanics that maybe haven't been used since MOP because we've been weak-oring them ever since, and now we get to solve them with our brains again.
And he even mentioned too, he said like, well, there's a lot of swirlies now.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, like, oh, we can always default to this and a few other things because you're not going to solve that with weaker, so we can add fights where that's not a thing. But you remove that, you could, that friction of there's too many swirlies goes away. And I think there's assignment, like doing a lot of these assignment bosses without a weak aura that could work would be like really fun. Like it's fun to do that. It's fun when you have 5 people that need to soak something, like the last phase of Gallywix. There's a frontal on a side of a room and 2 people die. And right now weak aura is just like, okay, well then we're gonna assign backup. So these 2 people get a big green thing on their screen, go soak that.
So
that is something
right
where
now.
that fight is spread out enough where you could actually communicate that. We need 2 people on the right to back up because 2 soakers are dead. Who can do it? This person says
shit,
something,
that's a
this
bad
person
timing
says
for
something.
me.
Now, obviously you're not gonna have that kind of
was
communication
real
like
bad.
heroic and normal. Maybe you won't be in comms, whatever, but in Mythic, that's perfectly reasonable, right? A lot of the things, like we could probably count honestly on 1, maybe 2 hands over the last like 4 or 5 years, how many bosses would you meaningfully would have to have a mechanic change, but they are very impactful, very memorable, and they have been purely defined by that. Are you
they're
worried
absolutely
at
right.
all
I love
about
what I'm hearing
the
on this.
communities, and this has certainly been ramping up over time. Like you mentioned, even for us, we were much more just do the mechanic 4 or 5 years ago than we are now. Are you worried that there has been this built-in reliance on it that might be hard to shake when creating new raid bosses?
Absolutely. And I think
The way he said that, he knows. He's like, please don't hurt us.
Into this, that anyone would just kind of rip the Band-Aid off and say, all right, have fun, we're in a new world, as opposed to building up more built-in functionality, starting to have clearer visuals, simplify some mechanics, and then building counters and to have classes designed around a world where we know that this isn't possible. As long as people are set up for success, I think we'll be fine. Certainly, if we were to disable any functionality and then players went into a new tier and like we're just wiping to bosses and like they used to clear heroic comfortably and now they're like brick walled halfway through heroic, yeah,
Mysterious
players
pants.
like that would be a source of tremendous frustration. But we know that we need to avoid that by any means possible, and we have a lot of work to do before we get there.
Something that really encourages me is the ping system. That seems like such a perfect way to give us an option to identify where we're going, right? You just ping where you're going, and then you don't have to, try and communicate with words. Hey, I'm going to move over to the left 20 yards, right? I just ping where I'm going, and that opens up an ability to solve these, again, in a YOLO style, right, rather than an
I think
assignment.
your guild did that.
Yeah.
So the Echo of Neltharion, right?
Yeah, we
like,
just pinged it.
yeah, so
Go for it,
famously,
yeah.
like everyone had the maps for that. Like, here's your exact spot you go, and then his guild was like, you know what? Everyone just ping your spot. Mostly it gets covered. People go to the same spot every pull. But if you see 2 pings in a spot, 1 person has to move, right? And that could largely solve a mechanic with just something that's already built into the game.
It's true.
I think, and ping
That's
system is something
smart.
we've also
That's real
talked about
smart.
looking to improve and to like
I need to set my
broaden
pings
the
up,
sorts of
boys.
things you can do with it, to give people more tools to solve these problems in a coordinated way, but using their own skill and expression instead of another tool.
When I think of World of Warcraft, I'm always thinking back to when I first started playing the game, and there was this really exciting moment where I looked at it and I'm like, oh my god, I can make this game look however I want, right? Like I can put this here, I can have an add-on that tells me what time it is in London, what time it is in Darnassus, right? I can have all the world clocks there if I want. I can have 3 different bars at the bottom of my screen. I can do whatever I want there, and to me that's always been a strength, not a weakness of WoW.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of people that disagree with me on that. But then there's also people that they hear about Blizzard thinking about restricting add-ons and they're worried about losing that. Is there any intention to go after any of that kind of customization?
Not whatsoever. And in fact, we're doing everything we can and we would do everything we can down the line to minimize any collateral damage to them. But the goal is anything that's cosmetic should be completely fair game. All informational stuff that's out of combat, like, again, you have RP add-ons, things that are tracking, helping with professions, tracking gathering nodes, helping you with quests, like, you name it, a bunch of accessibility add-ons. All of those, like, there's nothing harmful whatsoever about any of them. The only thing is, at the very end of the day, once we feel like we've done enough, on our end to improve baseline functionality, what we'd be looking at is the ability to parse real-time combat events in a way that drives, problem solving on the fly.
So it's kind of, we build the scaffolding to then be able to take away the existing weak aura solutions that we have for these. How much of this is, so the thing that's excited me also about edit mode has been, it's so clearly based on what the community has learned over 20 years, right? It's like, oh, the community has revolved around this as a solution for presenting this information. Let's give them that base in the UI rather than making them download something. How much of this initiative is still going to be based on what the community says, how the community reacts, versus which of these things are already kind of locked in decisions?
I'd say basically nothing here is locked in.
Okay.
Really, my hope today is to kind of begin a conversation about that direction and what areas are welcome, what areas maybe have more to do to convince the community on, and what areas we might be wrong on and should, reconsider. Because I think at the end of the day, this game belongs first and foremost to our millions of players. We're trying to serve them as best we can in the long run. And I think our sense is that for many players, the feeling that they have to download and use certain add-ons in order to play the game competitively isn't really part of what's attractive about the game or healthy in the long run. And so if we can pull things back to a place where add-ons are available for those who want to use them, but people aren't feeling pressured by their groups, by just the natural demands of competition and not wanting to lose out to someone who's using more advantages, then that's going to be the healthier route in the long run.
So if I was the kind of person who wanted to write a 10-paragraph forum manifesto, this would be one of the topics to do it on, right?
Absolutely. We'll be reading, we'll be listening. I think this is a long path ahead. And yeah, just, curious to kick off the conversation and hear how people feel about it.
Yeah.
So Rotation Assist is coming in 11.1.7, which is going to be hitting the PTR in the very near future. Can't wait to hear people's feedback as they're able to hop on and check it out. We'll be listening closely so we can make it the best it can be for everybody. It's also been amazing to just get a chance to talk through kind of the history of add-ons in WoW, where they are today, and where they might be going in the future. Thank you guys for coming out. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us here. Really looking forward to see what the community has to say about how much they want more of these casts, maybe monthly, maybe bi-weekly, weekly, whatever you guys think, put it in the comments.
Daily?
Daily? Yeah. You said it, it's not me. Thank you so much, Liz. This has been really, really awesome.
All right. That was really good. That was a really, really good presentation. That was a really good presentation. So there's a lot of food for thought here. There's a lot to talk about. First of all, I just gotta say I like everything I just heard. That was amazing. That they're right. They're absolutely right. There's so many issues with basically just the way that mechanics are designed. They're designed expecting you to have a little voice in your ear telling you a billion things, to tell you everything, to try and trivialize everything. And it does. It results in these types of mechanics like the swirlies of death that are, they happen so fast and they just one-shot you. And they suck. And also, like Ian said, Blizzard doesn't do a great job of showing you which ones are going to one-shot you, which ones aren't. Which ones are trivial, so on, quote-unquote, which ones are lethal. And that's been a big issue in the community for a long time. I'm really excited by the possibility that we're going to have raid mechanics that are more reminiscent of how they used to be, that they're going to be more based around cooperation and computation. They're going to be more based around skill checks in different ways, aside from, how fast can you dodge the swirly of death. I think that is a really interesting prospect, and that's something that the game used to have, and it's something that's slowly just been lost, and fights have become more homogenized. They've become more swirly based over time, and I see this as a big opportunity for Blizzard to kind of undo a bit of that history and aim for something a bit different, and I think that that's great. And people are going to be so mad about the rotation assist. Oh my god, people are going to be so mad. I've already seen it. I've already had people come to my stream, so completely pissed about it. I'm not worried about it one bit. This isn't actually doing anything new. These add-ons have existed forever. literally forever. I remember having something like Healy back when I was a kid. Back in, I want to say, Cataclysm. So this really isn't something new. This is just making sure that people that need it have access to it. They don't have to go go find out about it in a forum and to download it on CurseForge. It's just in the game if they'd like to participate in that. And I'm glad that with the single button thing, I'm glad that like the single button rotation, like auto button do. I'm glad that they're not basing, like, this isn't going to be like the ARPG on your phone, it isn't going to be like that. It's not going to be a situation where all the top parsers in the game are people using the smart function. Not even close. It's going to be the worst parsers in the game are going to be the people that use the smart function, and that's not just by design. Like, they very clearly said that's by design. That it's going to have penalties like within the GCDs. They also said it's going to that it's not going to be like perfect. It's not going to, especially at first, have every button combination. It's not always going to understand fully where you are, what you're doing. Thus, it's not going to be able to make high-end computational decisions like that, right? Like, you're going to have to make decisions if you want to be any good at this game. You're going to have to be able to read the situation and understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're about to be doing in order to create the most viable decisions. And those are going to be the people that parse it 100%. Those are going to be the people that blow people up in Battlegrounds. I just thought, as imagined a Rep Pally. I do gotta admit, honestly, a Rep Pally of a single button thing, like, they do so much damage in Battlegrounds that, like, there might be some Rep Pallies that rock that shit. But ultimately, all memes aside, I don't think it's going to be an issue. This isn't anything new. It's just that they're doing it in a way where people are going to be able to access it better. And then as far as what they're talking about limiting add-ons, I think I'm wholeheartedly, yes. I'm really glad that he specifically mentioned they're not interested in messing with out-of-combat stuff, or, like your professions and your auctionators and your Atlas loots and your LVUIs and, all the cosmetic stuff and informational stuff and profession stuff and world tracking stuff, This stuff is not what's on the block. What's on the block is highly advanced niche weak auras that trivialize what would otherwise be like major primary mechanics in fights, to the point where there's no point in having added it to the fight in the first place. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a whole lot of sense to me. We are just getting obliterated here. Oh my god, what's wrong with what is going on here? So much damage. I'm super excited what we just heard in that podcast. I'm really glad he did this podcast. I think it was a great idea for them to have Max and Dratnos on. That's huge. They're highly respected players in the community. They're both extremely good players, and they both are extremely prominent within the raid, high-end raid, and Mythic Plus scene. They're both seen as very much like maximum style, like, to the max players. Like, Dratnos makes spreadsheets and stuff, and Max literally raid leads the world first Mythic raid guilds, like one of them. And so, I didn't know primarily Dratnos is part of one too. I didn't even know that. That's what's up. But so yeah, a huge thanks to them for being on the show today, and a huge thanks to Blizzard for putting the show on in the first place for us to enjoy. And I'm just really, really happy to hear what we heard. Like, they said all the right things. Now let's just see how they implement it. Blizzard's famous for their implementations never being quite as idealistic or perfect or ambitious as their promises. And so, I definitely go in with a bit of, we'll see how it really plays out. But the philosophy is there, and I think that means they're not going to mess this up for the community. All right, so I'm happy to hear it. Very happy to hear it. Good podcast, man. Good podcast. Big fan. So let's see here. And while we were watching that, we got to level 78. Oh, don't get into that thing. Level 78 team. Almost to 80. I'm so excited to get into raid. It's going to be great. We're going to have to do like a raid finder stream. And I'm going to be like parsing myself. And we're going to be getting ourselves into a fancy guild. Fancy guild. Do a little raid. Get into the Undermine. Super excited for it. Also, I'm excited to get into Little Mythic Plus. You know, like, I know it's just going to get, eventually, like, it's just going to, like, plus 20s, and it's going to get ridiculous, but super excited to get into the raids. Super excited to get into the Mythic Plus. And I am excited, too, for some solo PvP. I mean, you know, I haven't heard great things. Frankly, I haven't been able to get into any of it because the, I haven't been able to get into any, like, solo PvP because the queues are so long. I literally haven't been able to get into a single match so far. But, you know.